You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
A mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
This is going to be a good program today, and thank you, Seasoned Pixels and Classy Lady. This is a opportunity to talk to another one of our guests that's going to be a speaker, a main speaker at the Red Pill Expo coming up in Mesquite, Nevada on November 8th and 9th. And Dr. Michael Rechtenwald, who has become one of my personal favorites because Michael is a gentleman who has seen the epiphany, seen the error of his ways. I grew up as a red diaper baby, and my father was a card-carrying communist early in his life, and so I kind of know how it is to see only one side of the picture, and then what an epiphany coming to, let's say, a realization that communism, in fact, does not work. And that is something that we need to make ourselves aware of. And this gentleman, Dr. Michael Rechtenwald, will be telling us just exactly how he came to that epiphany. And it's a fascinating story. He actually wrote a book about it called Springtime for Snowflakes, which really describes how that process came about and how he learned from the institution who he had spent much of his life working at, and how all of that, all of free speech and all the things that we've learned to love and appreciate as Americans wouldn't exist under the system that was envisioned by the people who are actually teaching our teachers and teaching our students how to think. So with that, Michael, I want to welcome you to the show. You are muted right now. If you would unmute, I'd love to have your early comments, and let's talk about Springtime for Snowflakes and how that all came about. Yeah, we've still got you muted. Let's see if we can unmute.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Got it.
There we go. Okay, hi. Hi, Dan.
Hello, Michael. It's going to be a lot of fun in Mesquite, Nevada. I know we've been talking for quite a few months about how all this has come about and how you had your epiphany. And I'd like you to kind of give a little bit more information on your background, and then how the whole process came about that turned you into one of the most hardcore capitalists in the world.
Well, my training was in literary and cultural studies. I received a PhD from Carnegie Mellon in literary and cultural studies in 2004. I started that in 1997. And what happened is through the course of, I'd say 10 years of graduate school and indoctrination, I became a leftist, and as part of leftism, I became a Marxist. And really, there's a very not so subtle insinuation when you're in graduate studies, especially in the humanities and social sciences today, that tells you that you have to be some kind of a leftist, and that Marxism is basically the mother of all leftism, you know. And so in the course of, studying for my PhD and master's degrees, actually, I became a Marxist, and it seemed to me that it was the most rational and convincing and egalitarian and fair and equitable system for the distribution, for the production and distribution of wealth. And it was many years. I wrote many papers in Marxist theory and Marxist analyses on the economy, on such things as identity politics, on socialism and the singularity, technological singularity, things like that. And I was firmly in that camp. And I was in my 8th year at NYU, many years into my professorial work, when I came out against what I saw happening in the university, this kind of emergence of social justice ideology. And I saw they were having, they instituted a bias reporting hotline in the university in which students could report on other students or their professors for bias infractions. And this seemed to me like a Stasi state, of this kind of reporting system in which, basically you could turn in your professors for having the wrong kinds of thoughts or ideas. And they also, were no platforming speakers all over the place, like Milo Yiannopoulos at NYU just that fall of 2016. And of course the safe spaces, safe spaces in which, after the election of Trump became insane, they had all these safe spaces for students, so that they could have recover from their electoral stress and anxiety. And they had petting animals and even pacifiers, So I started to criticize all this, and I was attacked like insanely by colleagues. This committee calling themselves a diversity, equity, and inclusion group. They came down on me like a ton of bricks after I gave an interview to a student newspaper. And within 48 hours of that interview appearing in the press, I was summarily called on the carpet by this committee. They denounced me for retrograde ideas and for having the wrong kinds of thoughts. They literally said that. They called me morally reprobate. I was morally low on the moral hierarchy, according to them. And also, I was put on a paid leave of absence within 48 hours. Escorted off of the campus by the head of human resources, basically totally blackballed in the university system. When I came back, I was universally shunned by over 100 faculty members. And I was denounced in a series of blistering emails from like a bunch of colleagues calling me everything from alt-right to Satan to short pants white devil, fragile white male, all kinds of outrageous, calumny and, really libel. A lot of it was libelous too. I was called a drug addict with absolutely no evidence. And, so this book, Springtime for Snowflakes, is it's a memoir that details what happened at NYU and then goes into the history of my education and shows where the roots of all this came from, which was of social justice. It all comes from leftism. And by the way, the book is not in all caps as it looks here in the Amazon preview. It looks like it's all caps, but it's not all caps. I don't know why that does that, but in any case, this book goes into the roots of social justice, and it goes back to contemporary social justice has its roots in postmodern theory and also Soviet and Chinese communism. So I show those roots and then basically roundly condemn it. So after the left turned on me with a vehemence and a vitriolic hatred that is unbelievable, to the extent that I basically saw what the left was made of, what a totalitarian character they had. And I realized that, all of the egalitarian rhetoric and all that was a very thin veneer for this totalitarian undertow. And I just couldn't have anything to do with it anymore. I was red-pilled by the left itself. They basically, tore the scales of ideology from my eyes forcibly, and I was able to see what they were about and what leftism is all about, what communism is all about. It's the abrogation of individual rights. It absolutely has no regard for human rights. It cannot have regard for human rights. It always destroys human rights. And I showed how the postmodern roots of all these theoretical mumbo jumbo, for example, in social constructivism, which is this notion that everything is socially constructed, including gender and so on and so forth. I show how this is the root of transgenderism and also this. There's a notion called standpoint epistemology, which I show how that is the root of this kind of oppression Olympics that's underway, in which everybody is competing to be the most subordinated because it's a hierarchical inversion. The lower you are in the hierarchy, the higher you are. So it's a race to the bottom because the bottom is the top. So, that's it in brief.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's absolutely amazing because the one thing that comes out of your experience is the fact that, there's a lot of things come out of it, but the thing that stands out in my mind is the fact that the people who are talking about how important it is for recognition of minorities and minority views and transgenderism and all these goofy ideas, they support all these things and say they always act like they're walking the high road when in fact they're the worst of the suppressors of free speech.
Oh, they absolutely suppress free speech because they claim that there's this notion called discursive violence. They suggest that speech can be violent of its own accord, irregardless of any attendant actions that may be attendant upon that speech. That speech by itself has this violent tendency, and so they equate free speech with supremacy. And so they think that anybody that's claiming the right of free speech is a supremacist, just trying to maintain their power and domination over other people. This is why we see now this push for hate speech law, which would be a disaster. We have to fight this very rigorously. Hate speech law would be the slipperiest slope imaginable because before you know it, anything we say would be deemed hate speech. And therefore, they'll basically be using this as a way to completely clamp down on speech and expression of all types. It used to be, as the book says right here, that the left's notion of objectionable speech was to counter it with better and more speech, but that's not at all what they wish to do today. They don't accept the notion of free expression or free speech as we see it. Rather, they have adopted these notions of discursive violence and also repressive tolerance and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
This comes from Herbert Marcuse. He was the Frankfurt School theorist.
Right.
And he suggested that we couldn't have complete tolerance in a liberal society because you couldn't tolerate intolerance. And so they deemed what would be tolerated and what wouldn't be tolerated. So interestingly enough, in suggesting that we have a tolerant society, they deemed certain things to be intolerable. Likewise, we could not have pure tolerance. This is just how they have wrangled and twisted everything we imagine to be true into a pretzel. And it's just unbelievable. So this social and linguistic constructivism is one of the notions. And yeah, pure tolerance is impossible in a liberal society, they suggested. And Karl Popper was another instigator of this idea, the philosopher, in his notion of the paradox of tolerance. Basically, a tolerant society requires a dose of intolerance, is the idea.
It's amazing to me that everything that they say and everything that they do are really diametrically opposed to what they claim they're saying and what they claim they're doing. In other words, they claim one thing, but everything, if you look at it, if you take it apart, and that's what you're talking about now, is that they are doing the exact opposite of what they claim to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They claim that they're fighting tyranny, but they are the most incredibly intolerant and tyrannical political contingent imaginable. I mean, they're all about tyranny, and they think that they're doing. See, the way they justify it is that they are tyrants on behalf of the oppressed. So, see, they use the oppressed, so-called, as a lever with which they interject their power gambit. You know, their play for power, using the so-called subordinated as a means to leverage their power gambit. And they think that they are the arbiters of speech. And you see this with Antifa, who is, willing to kill you over something they don't think you're allowed to say. They're more than happy to. They think that they are justified and absolutely correct. Yes, as I said, they would sooner cut an opponent's tongue out than let her utter a single syllable with which they disagree.
Wow. That's fantastic. Well, first of all, I applaud you for coming out from behind the curtain. I appreciate you doing that, because this is exactly, and I'm one the same way, Michael, because I talk about how I was raised, under a kind of an idea that collectivism was a wonderful thing. Yeah. When in fact, if it had not been for the capitalist system and the system that we have today, I couldn't have been successful as a businessman. I couldn't have been successful in my life,
right?
Because I came from a poor, somewhat lower class family, and in our country, you can pretty much do anything you want if you have the will and the desire, and
that's right,
and the vision to take advantage.
Determination. And one of the things is also the belief. Let me just tell you one thing about leftism. One of the things that it's designed, I figured this out, I think this is correct. It is designed purposefully, and this is why I think that a certain contingent of the ruling elite are behind it. It is designed to make people believe that they cannot overcome their so-called class position. This is monopoly. This is how monopolists work. If you can convince the vast majority that they have no chance from the outset, they're going to just give up in advance. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly how leftism works to the advantage of super corporate monopolists. And that's why leftism is the chosen ideology, not just of the academy, not just of the media, but of corporations, but of massive corporate monopolists.
Absolutely, and the power elite who control the deep state learned a long time ago that it's not that difficult to control the useful idiots that will follow some bizarre ideology because they think it's the right thing to do.
Right. And another thing about ideology and the craziness is, it's much more, it's a greater sign of loyalty to espouse complete and utter nonsense. Think of how that works. If you can have people espouse and proclaim complete and utter nonsense, then you have shown to what degree you have control of people. Whereas, so lunacy is much more effective as an oath of loyalty than is truth, to a much greater extent.
Wow, what a statement! That's incredible. You're absolutely on the money with that, and that kind of explains why so many people will fall in line with this lunacy.
Yeah, exactly. And what happens with leftism is they just mobilize this rhetoric, this charged rhetoric, and so if you just say something and use this charged language, like, you just throw around these phrases that supposedly are like little bombs that they drop that are supposed to be argument, enders, right? But really, there's no argument there. They just hypercharge words so that when these words are used, it's supposedly the end of the story, And you can see this in all kinds of ways. In one of the things they like to do is say, well, that's far right wing, this or that, as if that means it can't be right. If you just label it with something like far right wing, then it's to be discounted in advance. And they do this all the time. For example, I was interviewed in the Epoch Times, and it's a newspaper that I respect. They are being called far right wing because they came from the health and movement, this movement of Falun Gong, I think it's called, that was opposed to the Chinese Communist Party. So they just label this far right wing and just try to dispel it and discredit it just like that. Whereas, there's nothing. So what if this label doesn't make anything wrong, but using labels, they try to disqualify different ideas all the time. It's one of the main techniques the left uses. And when I say the left, I'm talking about the whole mainstream media. I'm talking about, and I do believe that leftism is the dominant ideology in the social order today, and it's actually supportive of corporate globalist monopolies. Everything. If you look at the things the left wants, the leftists on the ground, and you compare them to what the global corporate monopolists want, they line up perfectly. Everything: internationalism, no states, no borders, one world government. All of these things are perfectly in line with global corporate monopolists, and the left is just their dupes. They don't realize it. They think they're radicals they think they're counter establishment.
Right.
But it's hilarious how they're just unwitting dupes, they're utterly doing the handiwork of these corporate global monopolists.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing that we see every time these programs come up, it strengthens the position of the corporate monopolists and the power, we call them power elite, who ultimately want to control all of society, and they envision a let's call it a feudalist system.
It's feudalism. I call it corporate socialism, but feudalism will work just as well. I know it's hard for people to get their minds around this notion of corporate socialism, but when I say corporate socialism, what I mean is monopolies at the top, and I call it actually existing socialism for everybody else. And when I use that term, actually existing socialism, it's a critique of that's drawing language from people that criticize socialism who lived inside of the socialist systems. And they talked about how socialism actually was for the majority. The only difference between status socialism and corporate socialism is who are the monopolists. Under state socialism, it's the state that dominates, controls, and monopolizes the means of production and the government. Similarly, with corporate socialism, it's corporates who dominate, who control and monopolize the means of production and the government. So it's really just the difference of who, in fact, are the monopolists in charge.
Absolutely, and well, V.I. Lenin referred to them as the useful idiots, and he said it when he was creating Bolshevism under the Soviet system, that naturally it would be easy to convince people to do whatever their bidding was, and then once they've used them and abused them, it's easy to get rid of them. And that's exactly what Stalin did with so many of his purges, was to kill the very people that actually got him in a position of power.
In fact, and so many communists will deny this, but all they have to do is read the history. Lenin was a butcher as well, and Stalin merely extended and organized what Lenin began, which was, murders, political murder of opponents. The first time that workers went on strike after the Soviet Revolution, after the Bolshevik Revolution, they were shot in the head. This was the supposed people that the revolution was meant to champion. They were killed summarily. So, if you read the Black Book of Communism, and every communist out there will discredit it and say it's been discredited. It's not been discredited. Every fact in that book, the Black Book of Communists, is validated with. It's all referenced. Everything is tied to very firm historical references. And I'm an historian, and I have examined the book thoroughly. We're looking at all the statements there are connected to original documentation. And so the Black Book of Communism makes clear that Lenin, too, was a butcher, and that Bolshevism was murderous from the outset. Absolutely.
Well, and on top of that, Anthony Sutton, who wrote a number of great books on the subject, he was the first to expose the international banking community that was behind Bolshevism. They paid for it.
This is what very, very, very few people recognize. Sutton made it very clear in his book, I think it's The Bolshevik Revolution, that, in fact, corporate monopolists and bankers were funders of the Russian Revolution. And why? Because they wanted to establish monopolies. The other thing is they wanted to get rid of potential competitors that might come out of Russia, because Russia was undergoing an industrial revolution, and there were potential industrial competitors there. So if they could get in and squelch those competitors, creating a monopoly of the state with corporations also monopolizing within the state, then they would squelch the rise of these competitors. And this is what Sutton points out so well in several books. Absolutely.
Dan may have frozen up there on his feed there, Michael.
Okay.
I'm Thumper.
Hi, Thumper. How are you?
I'm doing good.
I must have said something so stunning that he was stunned into total silence there.
Oh, occasionally his internet connection gives him a little trouble there. So hopefully he will. He might have to go out, and then re-sign back into the Zoom here. So if I can, want to just say thank you to you for joining us here at Patriot Soapbox and on Dan's show. And I understand you are going to be at the Red Pill, and
right.
I would love to get there, but unfortunately this time I'm just not able to make it. And love to meet a lot of the folks that are going to be there. So what's going to be the topics? Are you going to be covering pretty much the same topics?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about my exodus from communism first. And then I'm also going to talk about my recent most book, Google Archipelago.
Okay. All right. Well, I see Dan's back. Hello, Dan.
I'm sorry, Thumper. I don't know. Maybe today I'm not having a good internet day. But anyway,
it happens.
Yeah, it does. It seems to happen quite a bit. Michael, you talked about Anthony Sutton and the fact that the Soviet Union, I hope I didn't miss too much of the conversation here, but one of the things that scared the multinational industrialists about the Soviet Union or Russia at the time was the fact that it was the largest geographic area and the most rich in natural resources. It had the potential to bury them.
Oh, absolutely. It was a massively great potential, and they were heading into the Industrial Revolution. They had the natural resources. And in fact, the corporations that did fund the Russian Revolution did reap many of the rewards of monopolizing those natural resources, including the precious metals, the forestry, and the oil. So they did, but they plundered Russia for its gold, for one. And you know where a lot of that gold ended up? It ended up in New York banks under the names of people like Lenin and others. Lenin had, I think, $11 million worth of gold deposited in an account in his name in New York, according to Sutton. And I think Sutton is correct about this. And he has been followed up by another historian, by the way. So it's not only Sutton who has done this work. There's another book called The Russian Revolution. I think it's 1917 to 1925. And the author's name is escaping me, but that should get you there.
Right. Well, and one of, you mentioned that a lot of these multinational corporations reap the benefits. Certainly Occidental Petroleum and the Ford Motor Company.
Yeah.
While we were in Vietnam, fighting in Vietnam, the Ford Motor Company was producing trucks that were being used on the Ho Chi Minh Trail to haul Viet Cong south through Laos into Cambodia to propagate the war. And so our own corporations were paying for probably a lot of deaths in our population.
Absolutely. And, I call this is dirty capitalism. This is using state power to create monopolies. For example, go back to one of the earliest corporate socialists was named King Camp Gillette. He was the founder of the Gillette Razor Company, the very same one who recently in one of their ads denounced toxic masculinity. Well, they've been leftists from the very start. King Camp Gillette was a monopolist. He wrote several books. One was called World Corporation, in which he espoused the idea of a singular world monopoly that produced everything, all products, monopolized all production, and would be synonymous with the state. would be the state as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he not only espoused this in his books, but he also was a monopolist in his practice as a state, as a manufacturer of razor blades, because he managed to get the contract for all of the razor blades used during World War I by the American troops.
Mm-hmm.
So, this kind of hand-in-glove, statist, corporatist monopolization it goes back to the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a philosophical idea behind it. And people like Soros, actually, George Soros, they hold this philosophy. Their philosophy is they know better than everybody else what is best for the world, and that they believe monopolization is the only way to achieve it, because then they have complete control, and they can control everything that happens, production-wise, consumption-wise, government-wise, and so on and so forth.
And they envision most of humanity as living in a very, very, let's say, conservative mode where most people have very little.
Mm-hmm.
It's a race to the bottom.
Exactly.
And in that, then they can control all the wealth, and they can make sure that everybody stays down for a very, very long time.
Right. They want to, and this is why they promote socialism.
Mm-hmm.
They promote socialism. Socialism on the ground creates, see, what they're trying to perpetrate is that everybody feels like they're equal with each other. As long as they're equal with each other and nobody on the ground has more than them, they feel fine. So they want to promote reduced expectations across the board and across the planet. So they got to take places like the United States, where we have, independent entrepreneurial agents, people that are able to produce, that don't need to be part of the state or the corporate monopolist enterprises. They want to get rid of those people. They want to get rid of any kind of aspiration for individual independent wealth, and to create a leveling of reduced expectations across the globe, and especially in places like the United States, where there are expectations for upward mobility and entrepreneurial production. And so they use people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and even Elizabeth Warren. They use these people to promote and espouse socialism. Do you think these people, if they really were a threat to the powers that be, that they would allow them so much constant airtime and attention? No, these people are dupes. They are puppets. They are actually serving the elite. And he froze again.
Yeah, it looks like he has frozen again. Unfortunately, we have weekends when his internet connection works famously, and then we have like today, where it bunks out on him every
That's
now.
So he's giving me monopolization of the airwaves here.
Well, he's back. We got him back. So you're still muted there, Dan.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the problems here. I'm not sure. Last week I didn't have any problem at all, but
it could be the topic, Dan. Maybe
could be.
It could be that the state corporate monopolists don't like this and they're trying to interrupt it. I don't know.
It happens more than we would like here.
Yeah, we see it a lot. We really do.
But what I was saying is that people like Cortez and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, these people are dupes. They're puppets used by the corporate globalists, or as you call them, the power elite, to propagate socialism on the ground, to create this notion of equality amongst the masses. And it's an equality of reduced expectations. This is the key. So they're going to promote things like universal basic income, because as long as everybody has equal amounts where everybody's happy, even though it's lesser for everybody, right? This is what they want. And they have no idea. These people are clueless, that the puppets that they have perpetrating this nonsense. These people are clueless about how wealth is produced. They don't understand wealth production at all. They don't understand the need for capital accumulation in order to produce wealth. They think that the economy is a pie, and all you have to do is split it up. But what they don't understand is the pie has to be baked. And so the economy isn't about pies, it's about the oven. You have to have an oven to bake pies. And so you've got to have accumulation in order to have the capital accumulation to have the kind of ovens that are necessary to produce pies. This is what they don't get. So they think you just divide everything up. You divide everything up, then nobody has, all they have is what they left, all they have is what they can consume, and as soon as it's consumed, it's gone. This is why socialism ends up in total disaster. And it always turns towards capitalists to bail it out.
Exactly, like it's happening right now in China.
Yeah.
They use the Chinese experiment as a poster child of how communism works. It doesn't work. No. It works because they've got a large dose of capitalism to try to make the pie bake.
That's right. They're calling and interestingly enough, the Chinese Communist Party, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. Okay, that's their apologetics for actually perpetrating capitalism in order to bolster the so-called socialism that they say will finally flourish after 100 years or so. But the fact of the matter is it'll never flourish without capital accumulation and wealth production. And they know it, but they keep lying to the people and to themselves, frankly, because they actually are under the ideology as well. And this is what some people don't recognize, is that even these leaders are under the ideology that they perpetrate. They're also under, they also need red pill, these people, but they won't be red pilled because they'll never accept it. They will continue to push these lies forever, because these lies, it's very difficult for people to admit they're wrong, and that they've been wrong. And I was wrong. And I admit it. And that's a hard thing to do, I have to say myself.
Well, I have family members who have profited immensely because of a capitalist system. I mean, they've done very, very well. And yet they will turn around and support somebody like Barry Sanders or AOC, and they're having some real issues with Donald Trump, and it makes no sense. Why in the world are these people like that?
Well, there's this phenomenon called liberal guilt, and they like to push guilt upon people that have anything, and this goes along with, leftism has certain features to it. One of them is this. If you think of ideology like a computer code, it really goes a long way to understanding how it works. The computer code, it has a certain core, but it also has certain features. So the suite, if you will, the software suite includes certain core components. And it also includes features. One of the features of leftism is this notion that, you're always an underdog. It convinces the subject who holds that belief that they are an underdog no matter what. Because leftism needs people believing that they're actually underdogs in order to keep spreading this massive collectivism that it perpetuates. Because they think that they can't do anything on their own. They need to be in a collective and a massified group in order to have power. They then have to believe that they're underdogs without collectivism. So underdogism, if you will, is part of the software suite of leftism. Another one is guilt, that if you gain anything, you should feel bad about it, because you've done it at somebody else's expense, which is totally a lie. It's not true that you've done it at their expense. In fact, if you've produced wealth, you've done it to their benefit. Wealth producers actually benefit other people. And they like to they constantly talk about the wealth disparity or the income gap as a major thing, but without looking at the fact that, despite the fact that there have been monopolists that have benefited from state-supported state sanctions and state levers and things like that. Nevertheless, income disparity is not of itself some evil. In fact, as the incomes of the top have gone up, so has the masses' income risen accordingly. And so it doesn't, the individual today living in a modern situation has more wealth than the king in the 13th century. I mean, so it's ridiculous, this idea of income disparity being the major issue, and they constantly pump this out. Where income disparity is, if you listen to NPR, they talk about it like it's this plague. Income disparity, income inequality. Oh my God, it's getting wider and wider as more and more people are eating endlessly. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you're right. That's laughable, but it's the all Marxists see life as a zero-sum game.
Zero-sum game. That's right. If you get something, somebody else must be losing something. But they don't understand that wealth is different than that. It's producing wealth creates more, not less. It's creative. This is the key. And I think that George Gilder puts it very well. The difference between capitalism and communism is this. Capitalism, the root of the word is capita, which is head, brain, mind. So the point is, capitalism is creative. It's creative. It produces abundance. Communism is not creative. It's actually destructive. It has to take away. It can't ever add, because it believes that wealth is a zero-sum game, that if you have something, then I don't. It doesn't realize that wealth is actually productive of wealth. Right.
It's like the concept that, all right, you split up a pie. Once you've eaten the pie, it's gone.
It's gone.
The idea is to create more and bigger pies.
And create pies, not to...
Yeah.
The economy is not about splitting up pies. It's about making pies. I don't understand. This is the key. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
And if you were to listen to people like Cortez or Warren or Bernie Sanders and their constant railing, and also their rhetoric is just falling flat, especially in this economy under Trump, where unemployment is down, wealth has increased for almost every group, if not every group, African Americans, Hispanics, and so on and so forth. This thing of this decrying the evil capitalist is just not going too far right now, rhetorically, because people are not feeling that. It's not what's happening.
Right. Yeah. And that was a question by one of our listeners was, in your opinion, what do you think of President Trump and what he's been doing?
Again, I got to be honest. I love him. I think he's doing great. I love the way that he triggers the left, that he constantly is trolling them, and how laughably they fall into it every time. How he plays with memes and totally, like, for example, putting a medal on the dog. I mean, this was obviously photoshopped, and yet they pretended like it was fake, and that he was perpetrating a falsity on purpose, whereas in fact he was joking with a falsity on purpose. It's just so stupid. It just proves that the left can't meme. They don't understand memes at all. And I think he's funny. I mean, and the thing is, the reason they hate him is they're starting from the false premise. They're starting from a premise that having money is evil, and that those who have it are evil, and that those who come from it must be evil, and that he must be perpetrating some evil upon us by being president. Meanwhile, the guy's actually losing money.
Right.
In his enterprises based on doing this. He's actually doing it for nothing. He's not even taking a salary. His family members have given up business enterprises. They're not taking a dime. But people like Biden, who's never done a productive thing in his life, his family has benefited to the tune of billions of dollars based on his being nothing but a political hack. He is utterly just a complete fraud who is a rent seeker, who's done nothing productive, never produced any wealth in his life for anybody, and he's just using political office as a means of enriching himself and his family. So yeah, these are the people that I scoff at. And yet they are able to pull off this moralism about themselves, like they're the virtuous ones, right? It's incredible how the left, the most murderous political ideologues in history, who have killed more than 100 million people historically and imprisoned millions of others, come across and have the temerity to suggest that they are the morally superior people. This is despicable. It's despicable. And it's so ridiculous that how do they continue to pull this off? And if I do nothing else with the rest of my life, I will work tirelessly to show what a fraud upon credulity this is.
Well, and you said something, Michael, that was absolutely spot on point, and that is, I believe the left hate Trump so bad because he is so much smarter and so much better at playing the game than they are. They're a bunch of mindless bureaucrats and unachievers, underachievers, and Trump is brilliant in the way he plays the left, and it just makes him look stupid, and they know that.
It's hilarious. I mean, they just don't get it. And let me read a little quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, if I can, that just I think typifies what they think and how they are. He said, "And how clever such ambition makes people. For let's admire that skillful counterfeiting with which people here imitate the trademarks of virtue, even its resounding tinkle, the golden sound of virtue. They've now taken a lease on virtue entirely for themselves, these weak and hopeless invalids. There's no doubt about that. Quote, we alone are the good men, the just men. That's how they speak. We alone are the homines bonae voluntatis, the men of goodwill. They wander around among us like personifications of reproach, like warnings to us, as if health, success, strength, pride, and feeling of power were inherently depraved things for which people must atone someday, atone bitterly. How they thirst to be hangmen. Among them, there are plenty of people disguised as judges, seeking revenge. They always have the word justice in their mouths, like poisonous saliva, with their mouths always pursed, constantly ready to spit at anything which does not look discontented and which goes on its way in good spirits."
Wow. That's beautiful.
He called out the social justice warriors before they even existed. Yeah.
Well, I want you to mention the fact that when they first put you on administrative leave, one of the things, and this is according to your book, Springtime for Snowflakes, they actually said that you must be suffering from a mental condition, a nervous breakdown.
They said they were suggesting that I was insane, that I'd lost my mind. And because I criticized their social justice, that I must be crazy, which is exactly, one of the main techniques that the Soviets used to get rid of political opponents. They claimed they were crazy, and they often put them in madhouses. So it's one of the techniques of totalitarianism. Deem your opponents crazy. Deem them mentally unsound. Do I sound unsound to you mentally? I don't think so. I think I'm as sharp as a tack. No bragging here, but I'm not mentally defective.
No.
For them to suggest so is really disgusting and beneath contempt.
Mm-hmm. Well, it as you say, it's the way the leftists and the Soviets and communists worldwide have been able to stay in power because they demonize their opponents,
right?
And then they try to paint them as being mentally unsound so that they can claim the high ground and claim that their ideas are sound and the other people's aren't.
Yeah, just like USA Today recently said that Donald Trump was not fit to be president, and they've also had a slew of a retinue of psychiatrists and psychologists that they called on to declare him mentally unfit and psychologically unsound. Very much the same sort of routine that they've carried out endlessly. By the way, one of the things that I can tell you, as having been a communist, one of the things that what they do is this. People that denounce communism, they consider they're just mouthpieces for capitalist ideology. So the reason I'm saying these things is because I'm being paid off, or I'm just like I'm a mouthpiece for the capitalist corporate state, and so I'm getting some sort of benefit. I'm not doing this because I'm getting something out of it financially, or I'm being paid off by anything. This is what I think from having thought it through, and analyzed it intensely. It is nothing. In fact, it's great. I've broken free from ideology. It's the only way I've arrived at these thoughts. I was under ideology all the time that I said the opposite. And so this is just another way to dismiss critics of leftism, is to say they're dupes for capitalist ideology and so on and so forth. No, not at all. I'm not some sort of paid hack. Nobody's paying me to say anything.
Right.
This is what I think. Yeah.
Well, and you talked about it earlier. They're actually the dupes of corporatism.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, I mean that's the funny part about it is that
the thing is that they are actually the ones serving the masters, and they think they're the radicals. This is the funniest thing in history. They think they're really radicals, and they're serving the masters so faithfully and mindlessly at that.
Yeah, they really are the useful idiots. Yeah. Well, I want to talk about your book, Google Archipelago. We've got a great opportunity. I'd love for you to talk about technocracy.
Yeah.
To talk about Google Archipelago. To talk about the vision for the totalitarian state under a technocratic system, and how that all works, how that's all been put together.
Yeah, it's this is a complicated argument, and I try to start the book by entering into it through more pretty apparent politics, like what's been called woke capitalism and all that, and the way the way that these corporate leftists are using corporate, woke capitalism to promote their vision. And I tie that then into the what I call big digital, which is others call big tech, but big tech doesn't really capture a fine enough point on it. Big digital are those big corporations that are controlling the digital sphere. They're controlling cyberspace. What I'm saying is, and I've been validated in this with a lot of discussions with the Google leaker, Zach Voorhees, and I are in collaboration on some future work, is that they are first they've programmed people, the programmers, like the programmers at Google, Facebook, Twitter, and elsewhere. And then those people are putting their programming out through the digital sphere. And cyberspace is a space of programming and control and censorship of the masses. So, and they're creating a sort of what I call a gulag, a digital gulag, which is to say it's a place for censorship, control, unpersoning or disappearing of people cybernetically, and so forth. Just like the Gulag Archipelago was a way of politically controlling, disciplining, censoring, and disappearing of political opposition. Similarly, they're using the digital sphere to disappear, censor, control, and technocratically control the population and their thinking. And it goes so far as they're actually. The reason I say I call the book Google Archipelago, the digital gulag and the simulation of freedom, is that goes so far as to simulate a false reality and then to suggest that it's real, and then to basically penalize and disappear anybody that disagrees with this false simulacrum that they're trying to produce. Mm-hmm. It's a complicated argument, and it's taken a while for the book to get the kind of traction I think it deserves, but I think that upon analysis and people really digging into it, it's going to be validated. And I've had a great deal of gratification from the fact that Zach Vorez says that it's absolutely correct. That what they're doing is you've got a bunch of social justice warriors who basically are brainwashed, and they are perpetrating and they're spreading their beliefs out through the digital sphere to control the rest of the population with the same sort of leftist ideology. Mm-hmm. They are leftist authoritarians, and they are promoting leftist authoritarianism through the web.
If I may, Michael, we've had Zach as a guest on Patriot Soapbox a couple of times now.
Right.
And it would be fascinating. I just mentioned it to Dan to have you and Zach on here together and discuss in a kind of an open back and forth forum. That would be pretty wonderful. Awesome.
Yeah, Zach is a friend now, and we're working together on a book of our own. It's going to be a sort of a down and dirty manual or expose without the theoretical part that I put into the political aspect, but really just getting down into the nitty gritty. Basically, what Zach says, let me find this quote where we're talking about, their algorithmic unfairness, so-called thing, and machine learning fairness and all that. He says, real quickly, 1 second here. Let me just try to find this passage. He says, think of an SJW and that has been programmed, and then think of tens of thousands of them being employed. That is at Google. And then basically their programming of their minds has been then extended into the programming that they're putting out through the internet, and that programming is spreading across the web, and that programming is being used to program others. So basically, you have a bunch of robots or people that are completely programmed and brainwashed, social justice whack jobs, being indoctrinated, through education and all that, and through ideology, and then those people are then spreading their ideology through the entire web. This is exactly what I argue in the book. But then I, met Zach after the book was out already. I had used a lot of the data that he exposed through Project Veritas and their expose But I hadn't had a chance to talk to him until, after the book was out, and he came to be familiar with me, and likewise me familiar with him. He goes, you have to understand that, here's what he said. One second here, he goes, keep in mind that the people in the company are a mix of brainwashed individuals. Many of them are SJWs that are totally subverted. Many of them are and then many of them, others are just liberals that are like, what the F is happening here? He goes on to say, then imagine 10,000s of them being hired and programmed, and to take the programming that is in their heads and effectively spreading that programming through the programming that they're doing at Google and elsewhere, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about Google, and let's talk about the social credit system and the fact that the experiment in communist China, that Google is completely involved in that process and completely complicit with a system that is total top-down, total control.
Yeah, I don't think it's accidental that Google in the West and China and their social credit scoring and their artificial intelligence and their smart cities and so on and so forth are basically promoting the same ideology. And they're both basically, I think they're birds of a feather. And so it wasn't surprising to me to learn that Google was with this project Dragonfly that they were involved in China, was working with China to create a search engine in which when a person searched for a certain verboten topic, they not only didn't get the search results they were looking for, but they were reported to the state directly. Okay, this was Project Dragonfly, which was thwarted only by virtue of the fact that it became exposed on the Senate floor. Google was about to go forward with this and their project to enforce and to help China enforce this totalitarian reporting system. So in China, they have these things called smart cities. And what are these smart cities? They are total surveillance states that rely on tremendous amount of digital inputs and data collection on each and every person, including every move they make in space. What they have is basically every person has a digital signature. They're all tracked and traced using their phone and soon probably their retina or other digital signatures that then trace every move that people make, every purchase they make, every step they take, how long it takes them to cross the street, et cetera, et cetera. And that's all inputted into a centralized database. And then depending on the data that's collected, it's sent to various agencies. So social credit scores are based on this idea that each person has a credit score that's a total social, or I should say, socio-political score that determines what that person can do in society, including whether they can leave a certain city, whether they can go beyond a certain digital fence, a perimeter established by a so-called digital fence, and if they can go beyond that or not. And if they go beyond that digital fence, they are then reported, and they then might be apprehended or whatever. The social credit score is basically a calculation of their value, according to the Chinese Communist Party, their compliance with the system, really, what it comes down to. And depending upon their level of compliance, whether they can buy a home, whether they can own a business, whether they can send their child to a private school, whether they can travel beyond a certain perimeter. And in fact, it will then impact the social credit scores of others, whether they should be isolated from others. In other words, if you have a real low social credit score, even having anybody talking to you, their social credit score will go down by virtue of having communication with you. So it's a way of isolating the rogues, or those who they deem to be unfit, or those that they seem are dissident with the system. And this was already being contemplated in the United States, in particular with this establishment of HARPA, the Health Advanced Research Project Agency, that was being contemplated. I'm not sure what the status is now, but one of HARPA's functions was going to be to determine whether somebody should be able to own a gun based upon the kind of data that was collected about them, oftentimes from the home, using digital input collectors such as Google Home, Amazon Alexa, and Amazon Echo, and even the digital collecting that takes place or will take place and is already taking place in some cases through appliances in the house, through the smartification, or things, the Internet of Things, as they call it.
Right. In fact, Thumper mentioned, and this is something that we're doing now in this country, is insurance scoring as a version of social scoring. Yeah. So that if you buy insurance and you have a different lifestyle than they consider the model, then in fact you'll pay the difference. You'll pay a penalty for that.
Yes, and in fact, the social credit scoring is even headed into banking, where if you have the wrong politics, your bank may deny you or may close your accounts. And this has happened to certain people, so-called right-wingers, right, who have lost their bank accounts over their political positions. And in fact, they're already starting the control of people's travel based on their political profiles. You see that people like Laura Loomer can't enter the UK, Gavin McGuinness and Milo Yiannopoulos are forbidden to enter Australia. So you see that this is already starting to rise, the social credit scoring, based largely on politics. That's why I think it should be called a socio-political credit score. And Dan froze.
I think Dan froze up, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. While he's frozen up there, I work in the insurance industry. I own an independent insurance agency. And the social scoring, the insurance scoring, has been going on for several years now. Started by, guess who? Progressive Insurance. And you wouldn't believe the information that they collect and have been collecting for a long time in order to, affect this scoring. The American people have been under they've been scored by the insurance companies for several years now, and they don't even know it.
Wow. And what kind of factors are being considered?
Well, the typical insurance factors: age, driving record, and things like that. But your financial history, divorce records. Are you a single parent, or are you still married? Do you have children in the house? Also, they are starting to dive into the internet and find out if you have an internet. As a matter of fact, because I go on to the Q website, or the 8chan where Q is posting. I was informed that my name appeared out on the dark web, because that's considered the dark web, and my insurance company actually raised my rates because of it.
Yes, I see that happening with my credit score. I get these alerts from Experian saying that some Facebook post that I made set off an alert because of the the nature of the post, that it was something to worry about, and that maybe I should consider deleting it. And also, of course, to take into consideration such things in my next post, because in future posts, because they don't. I think it should be also. I think it could be called a social justice credit score, because social justice ideology will be impacting these scores.
Mm-hmm. Dan, you there?
I am. I shut off my video so that I didn't get myself in another position where I'm off the air. So at least this way I'm on air the whole time. Michael, I wanted to mention how the Green Movement, how Al Gore and the IPCC and all these ninnies trying to sell this anthropogenic global warming scam on the American people are a perfect example of how the useful idiots are, making arguments that make no sense whatsoever, yet they're continuing to do it, and they say the science is settled.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting contradictions there is the CO2 issue, which they claim CO2 is, creating the increase of CO2 percentage in the atmosphere creates a greenhouse effect, which causes the increase in temperatures. But also they suggest at the same time that there's deforestation going on, that we need to plant more trees. But CO2 is actually the equivalent of oxygen to plants. It is what creates plant life, allows plant life to flourish, just as oxygen is necessary for animal life. So the increase in CO2 actually creates greater degrees of vegetation on the planet. So the need for planting trees is obviated by the increase in CO2. So it doesn't make sense that they would promote both global warming and this idea of deforestation simultaneously. It's absurd. Mm-hmm. And also the idea that even if there is warming, that it's some sort of negative thing necessarily. In fact, there's many indications that it's positive, and that if there is warming going on based on the increase of CO2, which there might be, but it doesn't. What I argue is that the catastrophism that they attach to this is where the lie is created. That it's some sort of catastrophe, and they tell us that it's already causing these terrible things, but they can't ever tell you what they are. What terrible things are they causing? What so far has happened? Who is suffering from global warming to date? They can't tell you who or what they're suffering from. They'll say maybe it has to do with, there's more hurricanes, that hurricanes never existed previous to global warming, or there are more hurricanes, and this is not true. It's actually not true at all. In fact, there were greater numbers of hurricanes, previous to the Industrial Revolution in some periods. So it's not true that hurricanes are increased, and it's not true that there's worse weather conditions. So they really can't tell us what the things are, and yet they keep this nebulous fear out there that it's causing all these horrible atrocities, but we don't know what they are exactly. Now he's gone completely. There he is.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry. I thought taking the video off would make a difference, but apparently we're talking, Michael, about things that are giving me a negative credit score.
They're trying to make us look like conspiracy freaks.
Yeah.
At the same time, by saying that they're doing so, because in fact, it's possible that in fact our broadcast is being interrupted. But if we mentioned that, then we're nutcases. So
right, exactly. Well, the whole technocracy thing is a big deal. We're going to be talking about that at the Red Pill. Mm-hmm. You're going to be talking about how the deep state and and the whole left movement is using technology to destroy our society as a free society. And we've got people there that are going to be talking about 5G. They're going to be talking about, we've got people coming to talk about smart meters and smart grids and all this stuff. It should be a fascinating, really a fascinating discussion. And really looking forward. Well, first of all, I'm looking forward to meeting you because I've grown very to have a great deal of respect and admiration for you because you admit that you were on the wrong path. I was too at an earlier age. So
and likewise, it really wasn't your fault. You can't control the fact that your parents were, or your father at least was a socialist. I guess I could have been more wary about the fact that I was going to be indoctrinated into socialism or leftism. And all I wanted to do was teach literature, Little did I know that came with the requirement that I become a left-wing ideologue simultaneously. I just didn't. I was unwary of that fact that I should have noticed the cultural wars were underway in the 80s, and when I went back to graduate school, things had totally changed from the time that I was in when I was an undergrad. We talked, you were reading literature and you talked about literature. I didn't realize the whole canon had been thrown out, and in fact, everything had been deemed white supremacist, phallocentric, masculinist, patriarchal horror. That Shakespeare had been gelded and everything that was produced by white men could no longer be read. All that took place in the interim where I was in advertising. And I went back to find all this out, and little did I know that it would be required of me to buy into all this.
Well, you're talking about subjects right now that at this point in time in our nation's history, boy, it's sure good to have you jumping on the Patriot soapbox, because the reality is we need more people like you who have seen the other side of the coin and have personal experience on how the whole system works.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like having been somebody that really was duped and had bought into this programming, and I felt how it operated in my mind. I could tell you how the software creates various features in thinking and perception, that I can just tell you how it works. And because I experienced it firsthand, it was operative in my own psyche. And it took almost a violent cataclysmic ejection of this software from my mind in order to get it to stop operating there. Mm-hmm. So that's my specialty, I guess, at this juncture.
Well, I know that the technological aspects of this whole system, this whole implementation of socialism and communism is going to have a huge impact on what our future is over the next few years. Let's talk about the implementation of all this technology and how all of it is going to really determine the future of our country and how we can fight back against it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we should note that technology in and of itself is not necessarily pernicious at all. And I make clear in the book and in the preface that I'm not a technophobe. As a matter of fact, I worked in robotics as a writer in an artificial intelligence lab while I was doing my graduate work in English. So I'm not a technophobe, but it's the connection between the technology and the ideology of the people perpetrating the technology and the uses to which it's being put, which is the danger. And that danger is this, that, in fact, the cyber world has become the only place for it's the remnant of, it's the public sphere, it's the public square at this point. And everything else has been made basically obsolete, or at least ineffectual. You can't really reach anybody to any degree, appreciable degree, outside of the cyber realm, right? You know, if you go outside in a public park and stand on a soapbox, you know, the patriot soapbox outside of the public, the digital realm, you're deemed a lunatic. So, you know, you're discredited. So there's really everything outside of the cyber realm is really obsolete and archaic and ineffectual. So this leaves the cyber realm. And the fact of the matter is, the cyber realm is a place where there are some intrinsic aspects to the technology that lend themselves to leftist collectivist ideology and control, because the digital is a way of agglomerating people. It's a way of collectivizing. People are very easily assimilable to a collectivism within the digital realm. And I call this digital Maoism in the book. There's a way in which technology makes collecting people in groups much easier. And one of the things, you know, look at the hashtag, for example, and how the hashtag is a way of collecting people around a particular thought pattern. Okay, it goes both ways, but it is a collectivist idea. It's a way of getting people to agglomerate around a particular notion. There's other techniques of collectivism that the digital is very prone or very easily used to accomplish. So in fact, look at the internet and how it was founded. It was deemed this space of free exchange. It was deemed the commons, right? The new commons, where everybody could collect and they could then exchange ideas freely outside of the trammels of identity and money, and everybody had, would be a peer, and there'd be peer-to-peer communication and peer-to-peer economic exchange and production and so on and so forth. Well, just as the Soviet Union, and yet it ended up in this kind of this kind of centralized databases of the cloud, where these individual monopolists have control over all the information. So just as the Soviet Union promoted itself as a commons, as the control of production by the working class or the commoners, so too was the internet promoted that way, and then ended up in the kind of centralization that was very similar to the Soviet Union in terms of control and state control of production and everything else. So there's a parallel between the way the internet was sold and what it became, and the way Soviet communism or socialism has been sold and what it became. Both idealistic and utopian at first, and in the end, statist and statist and centralized in the end. And so what I'm getting at in the book is that you have a tendency to control people through collectivism, digital collectivism or digital Maoism, and you have at the same time the centralization of power and information and control. And this leads to a kind of shall we say, it's a totalitarianism. And then they're using the technology can be easily used in ways, because of the digital sphere. It's easy to get rid of people in the digital sphere. First of all, you make the digital sphere the only relevant place. Then it's easily to digitally disappear people, right? They're easily gotten rid of, and opinions and positions and censorship is much more easily carried out this way. because you can mark things as verboten. You can easily use machine learning fairness, for example, as Zach Corey points out, to mark certain types of opinions in a certain way, and then to perpetrate that sort of algorithmic control over different ideas across a broad swath of positions. I don't know if that's a little abstract, but let me just make this more clear. As far as machine learning fairness, what they do is you get a sample of statements and they label it like white supremacist, or they'll label. In fact, what they do is label things that they deem white supremacists as hate speech. So if you label, what they do is go and label it like a large sample of documents, of web documents, hate speech, and then they allow the machine learning to then accumulate more samples and to create a kind of pattern where everything that has a certain disposition is labeled this way. And then it metastasizes across the whole web. And so sooner or later, certain positions are disappeared from the whole sphere of from the whole internet. And then also individuals who hold those positions are easily gotten rid of. And deemed verboten entirely, and then completely gotten rid of in terms of thrown off of different platforms and so on and so forth. Are you still with me, Dan? Frozen again.
Oh my.
Speaking of being digitally disappeared.
Oh my. Yeah. Well, he'll blink out and come right back in here in a moment. He's been pretty good about getting that taken care of.
Yeah. I mean, I've tried to talk about how the digital realm lends itself to collectivism and how algorithms tend to create a binary opposition so that you have either 0 or 1. An algorithm operates on whether something is not or it is something else, right? That's 0, 1.
Right.
So it's an easy way of dividing the world into a simple binary of good and bad. And this is what's going on vis-a-vis machine learning fairness and their correction for algorithmic unfairness vis-a-vis this binary demarcation that separates the good from the bad, creates a world in which the bad are labeled and gotten rid of, and positions and opinions are gotten rid of that way as well. You back, Dan?
I am back, and the key to what you're talking about here is under a digital society, there's no hiding. There's no place you can hide, because with that and facial recognition and all the ways to track you through your smartphone or whatever, there's no place for you to hide. So they always know where you are. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, that under this kind of technology, this technocracy, they can shut you off where you have access to nothing. You
That's
cannot
right.
eat. You cannot.
There's nowhere to hide, but it's easy to. There's nowhere for you to hide, but you're easily located simultaneously.
Right.
And because you're basically a digital piece of data, okay, mm-hmm. and everything connected with you is a piece of is a digital trail, if you will, and so that's easily tracked, and that easily disappeared. It's much easier to digitally delete somebody than it is to physically kill them, so it's less messy than the Soviet system of the Gulag or the political assassination, but it's just as effective politically. That's the thing. Mm-hmm. And it's broader, and it's much more methodical, and it's much more scientifically shall we say, microscopic, and also sanitized. The sanitary effect of it is greater. I mean, it can This is their way of, it's a way of sanitizing opinion, such that anything that is deemed 1 as opposed to 0, that is bad as opposed to good, is easily marked and disappeared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you starve to death because your social credit score is incredibly low, that's your fault.
And yeah, that's right. You aren't being murdered. You're not being physically killed. You're just being, you're just being digitally reduced to the point where social survival becomes impossible. Mm-hmm. And this can't be put upon the system as such. It is entirely your responsibility, and it's owing to you. It's owing to you and you only. It exonerates the system from its own criminality, from culpability for its own criminality.
Bingo. Yeah, that's exactly what it does. It sanitizes the brutality of a totalitarian system.
Beautiful. It sanitizes the brutality of a totalitarian system. Absolutely. Yeah. It reduces us to zeros and ones, and likewise zeros in effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
How I end the Google archipelago, talking about that and how we have to resist the narratives. We have to counter this kind of narrativity, this digital gulagging, this narrative, the narratives that are being produced and actually then being backed up with data. They're creating fake realities and then backing it up with fake data to support the fake realities. I talk about this in the final chapter in the conclusion of Google Archipelago in connection with this company called New Knowledge, who produced fake realities, then had it reported upon, and then created that as if it was the truth. I mean, this is really what's going on. Mm-hmm. They were the company that supposedly exposed the Russian bots that supported the election of Donald Trump in 2016. And so they bill themselves as anti-disinformation agents. But then in the 2018 election, they created Russian bots who then supported Roy Moore in his bid for the Republican in his bid for the Senate seat. They created Russian bots that supported Roy Moore in order to discredit his candidacy on the basis that he was funded or that he was supported by Moscow or the Russians.
Right.
And then they told the press that this was happening, even though they were doing it. Mm-hmm. They were perpetrating what they then produced that suggested was a fact that was happening independent of their production of it. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of stuff that's going on. They build them and they call themselves New Knowledge. I call it new fake reality. It's a new kind of way of producing reality, a simulation, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's a really excellent point. Photoshopping is another perfect example of how you can create a reality that doesn't exist.
Exactly.
They can put someone's head on somebody else's body, and if you don't know any better, you think that happened to be the Donald Trump in a hotel somewhere getting peed on by a bunch of Russian prostitutes.
Yeah, and. The scary part is, though, that everybody has the potential to do the photoshopping, but not everybody has the potential to make their photoshopping or their simulation have the force or the credibility of reality. And that is where the digital producers who are backed by a certain amount of capital and funding and state support or deep state validation are able to make realities that then have, or simulations that have the force of reality. And that's what's scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure is. Well, I know you sent us earlier some some clips that about Google, and I would Thumper, can you put some of those up, and we can have Michael talk about those, because I know it was important to you that we have those up. I'd like you to explain them, because I'm sure they make sense once you describe the reason you included those.
Sure. All of these are documents that were dumped by Zach for his to Google, to Project Veritas in his in the Google expose, and I've talked with Zach about what these mean, and actually I solicited these documents in a conversation with him. So if you can start with the first one there. Let's see. I don't know what you have or what order you have them in. Okay, there you have the Google. This is the prediction software element of Google's search engine. So what this shows is that Google using human superimposition of search results in their prediction software actually creates the idea that certain phenomenon are prevalent when in fact they are not, and they create
like an illusion of
the illusion that certain things are prevalent when in fact they're not. So if you write in men can, let's look at the second one under there, men can, the first thing it says, men can get breast cancer, men can have periods, men can cook, okay, men can think about nothing, men can have babies now. These are predictions that Google claims are predictions, not suggestions. They claim that they're predictions of what people are searching for, okay? When in fact, these predictions are in fact suggestions based upon what Google wants you to think people are searching for. They're trying to impose upon us a vision or version of the world, not just a vision, but a version of the world that doesn't exist, but which they think should exist. And this is the best way I can explain it. And that's the way I explained it in the book. And I've had this validated by Zach. So these are suggestions that are filled in. This is the same way, in fact, they influenced the 2016 election and how they intend, according to their own executives, to impact the 2020 election by creating suggestions that about the election, like Trump is this or Trump is that. Now, the top one is Clinton bod. This is a Clinton body count. Now, this one actually is this particular prediction or suggestion of the Clinton body count was actually corrected by Zach. Zach. This is only after the insistence that Zach showed that this search was much more prevalent than Google was predicting or suggesting that it was, that the Clinton body count then came up, because this is a very common search. And what you have to do is compare the actual predictions in these search engines, in the search engine, with Google's actual data about searches. Okay, this is very complicated, but Google has another site called. Hold on a second, I'll get to it. Google has a site called. Here it is. Trends.google.com. And trends.google.com, can I share my screen and maybe I'll show it that way?
Yeah, you can.
All right.
I'll bring the share down, and you can go ahead and just hit that share button. And
okay.
When you do that, there's two little buttons in the bottom left-hand corner. Make sure those two little boxes are checked.
Share computer sound and optimize full screen video clip.
Yeah.
Those two?
Yeah.
Do I want to share the sound as well?
Well, if it just trust me, just do it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. You sound like Google now. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
All right. Let me share here. Okay. Now I'll bring up what I want to show you. What's this? Oh, I have to type a password to share this. Okay. This is my own internal.
Okay, you're muted now, Michael. You need to unmute. Mike, you need to unmute. Oh, darn.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. I don't know how that happened, but there it was. Okay. Can you see this trends.google.com?
Perfectly.
Okay. So what we're looking at here is the actual trends versus the search that would have been suggested by Google as a prediction. The trend is in the blue line, and the predicted search would be the red line. Okay. What had been coming up predominantly when you typed in Clinton B-O-O, or B-O actually, would have been Clinton book tour, which everybody just wants to know about, as opposed to Clinton body count. But with Google Trends, their own sort of backdoor revelatory website showed was that Clinton body count, I have the arrow. Can you see the arrow over?
Yes.
Right here, was actually trending way more than the Clinton book tour. Okay. Only after Zach pointed this out to Google and insisted, this is why he was still working there, that Clinton body count, that's probably why they knew he was the leaker, by the way. I shouldn't say leaker. He was a whistleblower because he's very open about it. The Clinton body count was way more predominant. He when he showed them their own data, they corrected for it in the search, such that when you now type in, and I'm going to go to Google and do this myself. Let me get rid of this, and you're still looking at my screen, right? Let me get my chats out of there. I don't want everybody seeing those. Hold on a second. Get rid of my chats. Okay. Speaking of digital revelations here, let's go to Google and say Clinton BO. Oh, it still comes up book. They went back. Look at that. Okay, but if you put the D in, there comes the body count. But if you have BO, Clinton book is still first. Give me a break. Like Clinton is really notorious for a book as opposed to a body count. No. But let's go to Men Can. And here we go. Men can, men cancer, men candies, men canvas shoes, but men can get breast cancer. It's still second, or fourth, I should say. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Men can have periods. Is still in that list. Men can think about nothing is in there. Let's go to Google. Let's go to trends.google.com. And now what we do is type in men can and search this, and it shows what the real trends are. Okay. This is their own trending. All right. So Men can. Okay, so let's look at this here. Men can have babies now. Let's click on that one. Let's compare it to men can. Okay. As you can see, men can have babies now is basically flatlined compared to men can. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yet when you type in men can on Google search, men can have babies now is in the list, is in the top 10. But it's nowhere near the top. As you can see, if you point on here, men can have babies now is 0 as compared to men can at 94. There's nobody searching for men can have babies now. I mean, it's very rare because men can't have babies, yet Google wants us to believe that men can have babies. Now, that's the question. Why? Let's go into men. Men can, what can men do? Men can...
fix cars.
Yeah, repair cars or...
Yeah, mm-hmm. Men can... well, let's see something more prototypical.
Drive.
Okay, that's fine. Men can drive. Let's just look at the comparison here, the real comparison between men can drive and men can have babies now. Now, you can see men can have babies now is flatlined mostly. There has been a point where men can have babies now rose above men can drive at one point right here, May 19th to May 25th, 2019. It rose above men can drive for a brief minute, but not by much. But you have to also understand that this is not a clean comparison either, because even the men can have babies now, the results in the trends also include all of the searches in which people complete the search that is suggested. Okay, do you follow me there?
Right.
So that if you accept their search, men can have babies now, it gets included in the trends. So this search trends, the trends comparison is already dirtied by the fact that by the fact that Google has suggested it to you, and a number of people have allowed that completion to go forward, and that gets included in the trends thereby.
Clickbait, in other words. This is so ludicrous. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, they're getting clickbaited into it. Like if I were to do this, let's go back to .com now.
What I found.
No, thank you, Siri. I don't need you right now. God, that bitch. Excuse me. Men can. By the way, if you call her that, she'll chide you for it, because she's being programmed by social justice warriors, and I'm not kidding here. She does chide you for it. Men can. Period. Let's go. Men can. What am I doing this for again? Okay, men can get breast cancer. Why was I coming back to this? I forget.
I think you were going to show how...
Oh, there's no suggestion that men can drive. It's not in here at all.
Right.
Right? And yet men can get breast cancers here. Mm-hmm. It's like, what, fifth? Now, we didn't show that one, but let's compare that. Trends versus... let's compare trends. Men can get breast cancer, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's get that up, and let's compare it to men can drive and show you the true results. Well, isn't this something now? It's pretty much even lolling back and forth, but now men can get breast cancer has spiked up between September 29th and October 5th, 2019. So apparently, a lot of people, upon the suggestion of this, I wanted to show you the completion. Hold on a minute. Let's go back to google.com. I wanted to show you men. So if I go like this, and I go and I pick it, okay, that then gets included in the trends. That search is now a fact, okay?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Even though it's been suggested by Google, it's a clickbait, if you will, yeah.
Sure.
If I pick one of these, men can have periods, now that gets included in the trends. Let's go back to trends again and see what trends, how that trends. Men can have periods. Okay. And then we're going to talk about, which Zach doesn't go into as much as I do in the book, why are they promoting these things? That's the question. What kind of world do they want us to think we're in? Men can have periods versus a men can drive. Okay, let's just see how this looks. Okay, well, men can drive is way over and above men can have periods. Yet, you notice when we typed in men can drive does not come up in the top searches, right? And yet you can see that men can drive is way above men can have periods. Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that men can have periods as one of their suggestions, people aren't buying it to the extent that it's overcome a real search, men can drive. Mm-hmm. Let's add in another one. What else could we compare this to? Men can.
Michael, we're going to be running out of time. We're getting to the end here. So what I want to do is I want to give you an opportunity to talk about just in general, how people can learn more about you, how people can purchase your books, how people can see you at the Red Pill Expo coming up. You're going to be speaking at the Red Pill Expo this weekend from the evening of the 7th through the 9th, and great opportunity. So,
yeah. Well, let me share again the screen just real quickly to show you how, in fact, people can find me. Can you still hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's go to michaelrechtenwald.com. michaelrechtenwald.com is where you can find everything about me. Mm-hmm. My books, essays that I've written, I talk about a lot of things like, for example, communist professor. There's the last talk I had with you. One of my most popular items, actually. Other writings, chapter samples from my books, piece about leftist ideology, etc. Events, you'll see the Red Pill Expo, Mesquite, Nevada. I'll be talking about why I'm no longer a communist professor and transhumanism and the Matrix. November 7th and 8th, I believe.
8th and 9th.
8th and 9th. 8th and 9th, yes. Mm-hmm. So in that order, I believe.
I wanted to mention, too, any of our VIP ticket holders will have the opportunity at a meet and greet we're going to do on the evening of the 7th to have a chance to meet you in person, talk with you. And then, of course, we've got our Red Pill VIP dinner on Friday night. And that's an opportunity also to get a chance to meet you in person. You will have books at the event, so you'll be there to autograph books, to do personalizations, and get a chance to meet with people. I tell you the truth, I'm really looking forward to this because I got a feeling we're going to be pretty good friends over the years.
Yes.
We see the world without the rose-colored glasses, and what a difference!
Right, we're not looking at it through the inebriation of the Kool-Aid here.
Right.
So, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Very much look forward to meeting you and all the red-pilled personages floating around the conference, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
Well, it's going to be a fun event, and it's coming up very quickly here. And so, folks, if you haven't had a chance to buy your tickets and to make your reservations, please do now because we're running out of time, and it's going to be a terrific event. And I know that Patrick Howley is ready to start his program here shortly. I want to make sure that Michael, any last thoughts as far as things that you want to tell our listeners about how important it is for them to get their brain back on track?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it is extremely important to hear and to read and listen to, and to also express your own views about the narratives that you hold, as opposed to the kinds of narratives that are being promulgated on us on a regular basis. It's extremely important to counter these narratives, because otherwise we're afloat in nothing but illusions and lies. And it's just, we just have to, our strength is in telling the truth. We just have to keep it up. And with that, Dan has been frozen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it looks like Dan froze up. Well, again, Michael, thank you very much for joining us here on Patriot Soapbox. Definitely is a pleasure. I don't know if you were able to watch the YouTube chat, but you're a hit.
Oh, really?
Our live chat loves you. And I certainly hope that you will get with Dan and hopefully come back. And the idea of having you and Zach together would be really awesome. I think you guys could really hit on some amazing stuff here.
Yeah, that would be really something. I think so. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's 3:00. It's time to turn it over to Pamphlet and Patrick Howley. So, Michael, have a great day. Enjoy the red pill.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand. Restore the Republic. We're losing our freedom in the land.